Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The real estate boom in Memphis tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by David Goodwin with David Goodwin Homes. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Along with Steve Brown from Cry-Like Realtors. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
And Wendy Greenlaw, who's Business Development Manager with Chandler Reports. So we wanted to do a show. It's the height of the summer real estate season. I guess it, in some ways in Memphis, it seemed like it's been the height of the season year-round, maybe for you all. There is a kind of boom going on, and we can talk about what that is, but why right now? And I'll start with you, Steve. Why right now? Everyone will say their houses are selling really fast. Houses sell as quick as they go on the market, nationally and then locally. Is that your experience, and why?
Consumer confidence is really high. Unemployment is low, even in Memphis. There's a lot of pent-up demand. A lot of people have put off buying, and they feel better. I think a lot of confidence is driving it, and there's still a lot of pent-up demand, but there's some headwinds. You know, rates going up a little bit, about 0.5 point since the beginning of the year. Sellers think they don't have a place to go. Prices are increasing, so there's some things that are pushing back, but there's still multiple offers on properties that are priced right, that are in good condition.
Yeah. And from your point of view, construction-wise, I mean, are you able to, is there more demand than you can get to? I mean, how are things going building-wise?
Well, the demand is great, and as Steve said, there are a lot of headwinds ahead of us, and probably year over year, the interest rates are up about 1 point. And so people, I think that creates a sense of urgency with a lot of people. And
to get going
before the rates may go up to 5% or whatever. But our main thing is that we're seeing such increases in cost of building the home, particularly not so much labor, but it is material. Yeah,
and it's material, everything across the board.
Everything. 14% on lumber alone in the month of May.
And is that a tariff-related thing, or that was just
that actually is a tariff-related thing, and so most of this a lot of this has become tariff-related.
Yeah. Wendy, for people not familiar with Chandler Reports, it's a real estate information company. Would say that it's owned by the Daily News. What are you seeing and what are you hearing? You work with a lot of realtors, a lot of builders, appraisers. Chandler tracks data.
We've been tracking data for 50 years in Memphis, Shelby County, and it's unprecedented. What we're seeing now in all the areas of real estate, everything from average home sale prices to new home prices, foreclosures, bank sales. We are seeing figures we have never, ever experienced here in Memphis, Shelby County. So average prices year over year, we keep seeing them increase up 9%. This year from last year. So it's been a constant incline, and we keep climbing and climbing in all aspects of
Is it across the board in terms of, I mean, is it just high-end homes? Is it just East Memphis, or is it both in terms of the range of prices and the areas of the Memphis area that are seeing this kind of growth?
As far as I can tell, high-end home sales are up, and we track that as over $300,000. Those are way up. They were up 30% in the second quarter alone, which does affect the overall average prices. But even investors that are purchasing are paying well above fair market value.
Talk about what an investor is.
An investor is anyone that purchases a property that does not reside in the property. Right. So their tax bill is mailed to an address outside of that subject property address. We track that as an investor purchase.
And that is by and large a rental, a home that's turned into a rental. Which we'll talk about that dynamic, which is both a national phenomenon and how it plays out in Memphis.
Right.
But in terms of the boom, from you both alluded to a little bit, but what worries you most? I mean, when you go to bed at night, it's the classic question. What are you most afraid of in terms of the home selling business right now? And then I'll talk about building.
I don't know that you'd call it fear, but lack of inventory is a problem because there is so much pent-up demand.
Inventory, just not enough homes to sell.
Not enough homes to sell. I looked back in the last MLS book is in my office. I kept it as a relic. It had over 8,000 properties for sale. Today we've got about 4,100.
And what year was that?
Sale.
The book you're
2001.
Yeah.
So it's been a while.
And
but
I'm sorry, I cut you off too. So 8,000 back in 2001, and now
4,100 properties.
Half.
And that includes condominiums, duplexes, that sort of thing. So
you're sitting at about 3 months supply, basically,
Yeah.
of homes. And I've spoken to people who've been in this industry 30 plus years, and they say they've never seen it this low.
Yeah. I mean, I can remember when we would talk at the office about 12-month and 18-month supplies. I mean, let alone the recession period, which was its own sort of dark, but even pre-recession that there was. So that then asks the question for the builders: why aren't you guys building so many more houses? Why? I mean, if there's that kind of limited supply of homes, why not build twice as many houses as you are now?
Well, there's a limited supply of builders out there, and after the recession, and I refer to it as a depression in the home industry, there were so many people that were shook out that did not want to come back, were unable to come back. Lenders are still not, you have to have very good credit today in order to do that. A lot of people are still just trying to recover from that. So, there was an old saying that Kemmons Wilson said one time, or Wallace Johnson actually said, if you would give the builders the money, they would cover the entire surface of the world with housing. So it's not a lack of desire to build, but it's just the ability to still build.
A friend of mine who is a builder, was a builder, I remember years ago saying to me that we as builders don't know how to stop. We will always build until we should have stopped a year ago, and then we build our way into the bust. And so that turned that question: what worries you most? I mean, about a possible turn in the economy, of overbuilding. I mean, or you feel like you're far away from that kind of concern?
Well, we are far away from overbuilding, and the pent-up demand, as Steve referred to, is great, and but it is also the prevailing factor is that the lack of lots to build on.
Yeah.
And the new model is that developers / builders are developing their own product and not selling, an arm's length transaction to other builders. Yeah. So they're still having trouble finding lots.
And I remember being and I think you and I, Wendy, were at it was a talk by a national economist, maybe from the Realtors, National Association of Realtors, years ago, probably back in the recession, talking about nationally this coming crisis, that there weren't enough vacant lots nationally. In Memphis, the Memphis area, why is that? Why, I mean, you can drive through certain, people might think, well, there's plenty of land out there. Why, of course there's land.
Well, probably the biggest thing at the moment is the moratorium on sewer in Shelby County. And that's going to have a direct effect on the number of starts. DeSoto County, where I'm active, is just, they far exceed what we were doing. I think a couple of years ago they did 1,400. We were scheduled to do maybe 850 or something new home sales and permits, and so it's it's the availability of land that's sewerable. Yeah. And it's also, the schools drive everything these days.
Let's say, I want to come back to schools. And we don't have Bill today to give us the history of sewer management, but it is actually, I mean, you kind of joke about it. We've done a few shows on sewers and the sewer moratorium, and the degree to which that defined and guided development for you and your business. People kind of lose track of that was part of it, that if the city's putting in sewers, if the suburbs are connecting to the city's sewer system, that sort of was opening a door to you all to build a subdivision, right?
It was, yes, absolutely.
But the moratorium that the city put in place, is it no more connections, or they would only finish out those that were kind of approved or permitted?
Well, it's a little muddled, what the actual situation is going to be, but there are some people that were already in the line that are permitted to go ahead and tie into the city sewers. And so that, I'm not sure how many. That's an ongoing situation that the home builders and others are engaged in conversation with the city on, and we hope that we can somehow come to a resolution that because people have bought land, we're planning on it, we're told they could tie into the sewer, and now they're not.
Right. In terms of schools, you mentioned schools. I'll just get Steve involved. I mean, is that still one of the classic drivers of where people move? Is the quality of schools, or?
It always has been.
Yeah.
People that move into the area, it's there are multiple places you can check to see where the best schools are, and we absolutely see more demand. People multiple offers in those areas where public schools are. People will drive for the private schools, but the people who are going to use public schools, it definitely has an effect on demand.
And what about, I mean, people talk about the shift of millennials that kind of wait longer to have children. They want to be more in urban core or downtowns. They want maybe a simpler life. Does that play out? Is that just kind of talk in the media, or do you actually see that in your business, that younger people have different buying habits?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I want to take every opportunity I can to dispel a myth. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what it takes to get into a house. Credit scores affect their ability to buy, but also they're concerned that they need 10 or 20% down to buy a house, and that's not true. With Tennessee Housing Development Agency, they can get in with $0 if a seller's willing to pay some closing costs, or FHA loans, sales prices up to $300,000, they can get in with 3.5% down. So there are a lot of people out there in apartments or living with their parents or whatever that think that they don't have enough money to buy, and they actually do.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of those millennials, because we know that they want to buy. They say by high percentages, high 90 percentile, they want to buy, but they think that they've got to have all this money down. It's not, and so they can buy.
Yeah. Do you hear that from, because you work with lots of realtors and so on, I mean, and bankers and so on, do you agree with Steve in terms of that? Is there that misperception, or is it also just a way of life that millennials don't want to be tied down, they don't want something big?
I think that Steve's right on point with that, but other things that I hear are student debt. So that's crushing to a lot of people. And I know a lot of the local lenders, I believe, have programs to help people get that reduced or to a lower payment to where they can afford the student debt as well as a mortgage payment.
Yeah. To what extent does, you mentioned apartments, and there is this kind of boom in multifamily right now, it seems like. There are a lot of high profile projects downtown, a lot of, in Midtown, new apartments going in on Broad Avenue, and kind of sort of more, I don't know, a hipster kind of, places crosstown with all its, apartments and stuff. Is that a threat to you all in the home selling buying business?
I don't see it as a threat. It's housing, and people have to have housing, but I think as they decide to have children, they want a little more space. And if we had 1,000 more new homes, we'd sell them like that.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, they're paying $1,200 to $1,800 for rent. Their house note would be 40% less on that. So even with upkeep, it'd be less expensive for them to be in a house, but we don't have the supply.
Yeah.
One thing I am hearing on the investor side on the multifamily is, we're not talking about those big complexes like Crosstown and such, but where you have under 50 units. A lot of investors are saying that there's so many single family rentals available in Memphis Shelby County, they can't keep the occupancy up.
In the multifamily?
In the multifamily units, which is kind of an interesting dynamic, and that ties back into inventory as well with all the investor activity and investor-owned properties. They don't go back to the retail market usually when they're investor-owned.
Yeah.
So that's keeping that inventory kind of tight, I think, as well.
Let's focus on that for a second. Some of this, and you just correct me where I get this wrong. During the recession, during the real estate depression, as David said, a lot of homes that were foreclosed on were bought up by investors, either individuals or somebody who bought a handful. They might be based in California, they might be based locally, and then also hedge funds and big, really Wall Street level companies started buying up nationally, and all this was a national phenomenon. But in Memphis, and so there are hedge funds that own thousands of homes, single family homes in Memphis, which is an interesting dynamic. We've talked about it a little bit on the show before. In Fraser, for instance, Steve Lockwood, who runs the Fraser Community Development Corporation, I said that wrong, and that dynamic of, on the one hand, those companies coming in, actually improving the homes, and actually doing, from his point of view, a pretty good job of keeping the homes up. But at the same time, some people express concern that when you have a neighborhood that is based mostly on renters versus people who own, they worry about that.
Right.
Your thoughts on all that?
Well,
I mean, did I get the dynamic right?
You have the dynamic correct,
Right.
yes. And one thing to make note of is in Q2, those hedge funds that were buying, hundreds of properties every quarter, they purchased virtually none, which is kind of alarming to me, just to say, is Wall Street kind of slowing down on that activity, and why? Is it seasonal, which I've asked other investors and they say no, it's not, but there were like a handful of purchases. And then I've seen a handful of other hedge funds that are selling, and I think it's because the market's tapped out at its peak, and they're selling to other individual investors. They're not selling back with a realtor. I'm not sure how it's going to overall affect our community. I do have concerns about it. My neighborhood is starting to become overrun by investors, and I think other areas are as well. I think it did improve a lot of communities like Fraser, where homes were vacant and abandoned, and they were able to come in and fix them up, and they're great rental units. But my concern is, from a community perspective, having all these rentals, over 30% of Shelby County is investor-owned. How is that going to continue to affect people that want to buy a home? Are they not going to have any available to buy?
And just to repeat that, I mean, it's an interesting thing. There's some statistic you had, maybe it was last year, that 25% of the home sales were to people who turned around and rented those homes out.
It was 30%.
30%.
And last year was up to 40%. And of those 40% that were purchased by investors, over half were out of town.
Yeah.
People. So
But how does that affect your dynamic? Does it? I mean,
Well, there's less supply because they'll suck up 20 houses in a month easily, and in a particular area. They don't buy everywhere, but they've got their criteria that they use. It just makes it tougher for that person everybody wants to get a deal, and the investor can come in and close with cash in 2 weeks. And somebody else it's going to take them a 30, 45 day process. They've got to get a loan, they've got to get credit. So the investor has an upper hand in those price points where they operate. So it makes it tough. I think when they slow down, I think there's enough demand to pick up that capacity.
And it is broad-based. I mean, it's not. I mean, there was a perception at one point that it was Fraser. It was some pretty rough neighborhoods. It was only inner city, kind of rougher neighborhoods. And it's not fair for me to call it a rougher neighborhood, but
they're lower income, and
right,
so we've seen over the last year they are expanding out east. So they're down East Memphis, going out to Bartlett. Heavy activity in Arlington. They've gone out to Germantown. I saw one of them purchase their first property in Collierville, which surprised me. But it is under that price point of probably $200,000, but it's still occurring in neighborhoods across the county.
Does it come up in terms of people buying and saying, "Oh wait, there are a lot of rental homes on this street. I don't want to buy there"? Does it affect people's psychology on that?
I guess it depends neighborhood to neighborhood, because it's hard to tell in some communities. You can go in and you can't necessarily tell that there are a lot
There's
of
no
rentals.
sign in the window. You know it's multifamily. You know it's an apartment complex. You don't know that the house next to you is.
And I'd also
rented.
say that there's it's not just the hedge funds. You've got Israeli investors that are coming in. They may own 20 houses in the market, and Australians or wherever they may be from. It's not all hedge fund driven, and they're individual owners that we represent that have 5, 10 houses. So it's pretty diverse.
Everyone thinks it's hedge funds, and that's
Right.
the majority, and it's not. If you look at the overall number of parcels we have in Shelby County, it's over 300,000. I would say probably less than 4,000 are owned by hedge funds. The rest are these individual investors from all over the world, all over the country, a lot from California,
Right.
New York, those areas that will pay higher, rates for homes and above fair market value because they're getting some return that they can't get in their own state with, rental units.
And again, to get into the dynamic of it, they bought a home, they're renting it out, so they're making rental income on a monthly basis, and then hope at some point to sell that house and maybe make a gain based on what they originally bought it for. And I mean that's
Well, it
the whole
depends on the
business.
investor.
Yeah,
right.
it depends on the investor.
Some like to have that passive income for retirement, so they just purchase 10 to 20 properties, and they'll just sit and hold that until their family sells it off, or they'll just keep it in the family for years.
Yeah.
Depends.
Do you do any building? I mean, I've read about it in other communities where people are doing build to rent. Single family homes that are built to be rentals versus we're mostly talking about existing homes that are bought and turned into rentals. Have you seen any, or have you done any build to
I
rent?
haven't done any personally, but I know that there are, builders that have built exclusively for these hedge funds and larger groups that build the whole subdivision out as rental.
Yeah. 8 minutes left here. To what extent we talked about schools driving, where people buy, where people build. But taxes as well. I mean, we have a lot of politicians on the show. People always talk about the high tax rate. Other people talk about the lack of services. So you need the taxes to pay for it. DeSoto County, has much lower taxes. Most of the suburbs have lower taxes, up a little bit from where they were. Is that still a huge driver in terms of where you're building?
Yeah, it's certainly a factor that to be considered. And yes, it's just hard to build in the city of Memphis these days unless you're doing a small infill or doing multifamily or something of that sort. So yeah, it does have a. Certainly.
When you're in the city, well, you were going to say something about tax. I mean, again, you must see people saying, "Well, look, yeah, I can save."
Well, the people who don't have children in schools, for instance, if they can find an affordable property in Fayette County, I had a seller whose taxes went from $25,000 down to about $1,000 a year for a property, over $800,000. So it's significant, and if Fayette County can get their school figured out, a high school figured out, and I was talking to a builder developer last week that said that he had a sewer system that he had found in East Tennessee that he had spoken to officials in Fayette County about it, and they seem to think it's going to be okay. If they get those type of situations where they don't have to rely on city sewers and they get a good high school, you're going to see a huge boom in Fayette County.
Kind of like what happened with DeSoto.
Yeah, along the 64 corridor, along the Poplar corridor, Piperton, Rossville, out east of there probably. Land costs are pretty high in Piperton, Rossville probably.
To what extent, we talked about millennials, the other thing people will talk about in the real estate business is baby boomers, people downsizing to some amount of downsizing back into the urban core. People want a little bit more walkability, they don't want to drive as much. Does that really play out, or is that just the media kind of highlighting stories?
No, I'm glad you said that, because we tend to focus on millennials, and we love millennials. We know they're the biggest demographic for the future, but last year 58% of the homes sold in the U.S. were not millennials. They were boomers. About 30% were boomers, and high 20 percentiles in Gen X. So I think we need to pay attention to what those people's needs are too. And ironically, some of them are buying bigger places, bigger properties, but they're not. They're just designed differently. More square footage on the ground floor. But getting away from those properties where all the bedrooms are up, that sort of thing.
What about condos? We hardly mentioned it. Memphis has never been a particularly big condo market. What's going on? I mean,
last year condo sales were up significantly, and we noticed in East Memphis they were up, I think, 30% year over year. But
the sheer number, I'm putting you on the spot, but it was hundreds, not thousands, right? I don't think that there were thousands.
I think it was under 1,000, yeah. Right. And it was, for years it was downtown, and that was the hottest market. But we just saw a lot of activity in East Memphis, and I don't know if you can speak to why that was.
I think a lot of that fear and concern about condos is gone. And I think you get a better quality product than you had. We had some conversions and things that kind of gave them a bad name. But I think today, what I see, places like the Laurels around the University of Memphis, downtown, the quality of the those conversions, lofts and whatnot are extremely popular. Yeah. And so I think that reputation is not so much not so strong.
And the fear really is that somebody goes into it happened nationally. It happened in Memphis. People go into the condo development, they buy, 3 of them get sold, and then the whole project goes under, and those people are kind of stuck. And that scares everybody off, that they don't want to be stuck in that way. Is that the fear you're talking about? Or
no, I think previously people were concerned about having a high HOA fee.
Oh, the fees you have to pay on top of your
lack
mortgage.
Of control of the property and the way they wanted to handle it or whatever. But I think Memphis has matured in some sense a little bit along those lines, and empty nesters, people that travel, they see the benefits of a condo. And in fact, MLS now combines condominiums in with single family homes. When you do a search, you're going to pull up houses and condos in that same search.
Yeah. Do you, all these apartments that are being built, would those, there are some downtown that have gone from apartments to condos. Would you foresee more that happening again? That these apartments being built now get turned into condos eventually?
There was in 06, 07, there was a tremendous amount of conversions and things like the Horizon turned Artesian that were on the High Line. I don't see that type of frenzy in the market, but it amazes me that the demand seems to fill when, I mean, the supply is jumped on when downtown when they can provide some type of new development. So I think the demand is there, especially now with what's going on with St. Jude, with the Orgill people buying more property downtown, the Chiska, the development of the Chiska. So both anchors downtown are improving, and I've never seen anything like it.
Well, it'll be. I mean, the One Beale project was announced, and looks like it's now on track, where they're putting the hotel and they're doing apartments, and there's gonna be more down in that south front area. And to drive around there is pretty amazing, the amount of activity that's going on there, that you would think that would just become a virtuous circle, or just it would beget more growth.
I grew up in Memphis, and south of Chiska, it was just really sad, and now all of that's revitalized. If you haven't driven around south of South Bluffs in Memphis, Tennessee, and you're a native, you ought to see how nice and new and the developments that's going on in that area.
This is where we've done basically almost whole shows on the residential pilot program, the incentives for these multifamily projects. For you as a builder, does that kind of drive you nuts? I mean, there is incentives targeted to a certain kind of building that is ultimately kind of competitive with you, or is that just the way it works?
Well, it's a little foreign to me, and it does. It's there may be a little bit of resentment, because it's hard to understand why they give incentives when the market is so good. And of course, we, people like myself, suburban developers and builders, we get very little. In fact, we pay for the privilege of building.
All right, well, we'll do a whole show on that soon. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.